In the year 541 CE, a devastating disease emerged from the eastern provinces of the Byzantine Empire and rapidly spread across the Mediterranean world. Known as the Plague of Justinian, this pandemic would become one of the deadliest outbreaks in ancient history. Striking during the reign of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, the plague reshaped the political, economic, and social landscape of the 6th century. Though often overshadowed by the later Black Death of the 14th century, the Plague of Justinian may have been equally transformative. It weakened empires, disrupted trade, and altered the course of European and Middle Eastern history. Origins of the pandemic. Most historians believe the Plague of Justinian was caused by the same bacterium responsible for later medieval outbreaks, Yersinia pestis. Modern scientific research, including DNA analysis from ancient remains, supports this conclusion. The disease likely originated in Central Asia or East Africa before traveling through trade networks into the Byzantine Empire. The first recorded outbreak appeared in 541 CE in the Egyptian port city of Pelusium. Egypt was a crucial grain supplier for the Byzantine capital of Constantinople. Ships loaded with grain, and infested with rats carrying infected fleas, transported the disease northward along the Mediterranean trade routes. From Egypt, the plague spread rapidly to Palestine, Syria, Anatolia, and eventually reached Constantinople in 542 CE. Within months, it expanded throughout the empire and into territories of the former Western Roman Empire, Persia, and parts of Europe. Constantinople in crisis. When the plague reached Constantinople, one of the largest cities in the world at the time, the consequences were catastrophic. Contemporary accounts describe streets filled with corpses and a city paralyzed by fear. The Byzantine historian Procopius provided one of the most detailed descriptions of the outbreak. He wrote that thousands of people were dying each day at the height of the epidemic. Victims typically developed fever, fatigue, and painful swelling of the lymph nodes, symptoms consistent with bubonic plague. Some suffered hallucinations or slipped into comas. Many died within days. In severe cases, entire households were wiped out. The Emperor Justinian himself reportedly contracted the disease but survived. However, survival was rare. As the death toll climbed, the city ran out of burial space. Corpses were stacked in buildings, dumped into mass graves, or placed in towers along the city walls. Economic life came to a halt. Markets closed, ships stopped arriving, and food shortages became common. Fear spread faster than reliable information, and many citizens believed the outbreak was divine punishment. Death toll and geographic spread. Estimating the total death toll is difficult, but many historians believe the Plague of Justinian killed between 25 and 50 million people across several waves over 2 centuries. In Constantinople alone, it may have killed up to 40% of the population during its first outbreak. Unlike a single, brief catastrophe, the plague returned repeatedly from 541 CE through the mid-8th century. Each wave further weakened already struggling societies. Regions across the Mediterranean basin, including Italy, North Africa, Gaul, and the Middle East, were affected. The Eastern Roman Empire, commonly known as the Byzantine Empire, was especially vulnerable because of its dense cities and extensive trade networks. What had once been a strength, economic integration, became a pathway for disease transmission. Political consequences. The Plague of Justinian struck at a critical moment. Emperor Justinian had ambitious plans to restore the former glory of the Roman Empire. Through military campaigns, he sought to reconquer territories in Italy, North Africa, and Spain that had fallen to Germanic kingdoms after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. However, the plague severely disrupted these efforts. Military campaigns stalled due to manpower shortages. Tax revenues collapsed as farmers, artisans, and merchants died in large numbers. Infrastructure projects, including churches and fortifications, were delayed or abandoned. Although Justinian's general Belisarius achieved some military successes, the empire lacked the resources to sustain long-term control over reconquered territories. Many historians argue that the plague significantly contributed to the weakening of Byzantine power and made the empire more vulnerable to future invasions. Economic and social impact. The demographic collapse caused massive labor shortages. Farms were left untended, leading to food shortages and rising prices. Trade networks fragmented as ports closed and merchants died. Urban populations declined dramatically. In rural areas, abandoned land became common. Some surviving workers gained bargaining power due to the scarcity of labor, but overall economic productivity declined. Tax burdens on survivors increased as the state attempted to maintain revenue levels. Social structures were disrupted. Families were broken apart, and inheritance patterns shifted as entire generations perished. The psychological impact was immense. Many believed the apocalypse was near, and religious interpretations of the plague became widespread. Religious and cultural effects. Religion played a central role in how people understood the plague. In the Byzantine world, many saw the pandemic as divine punishment for sin. Public prayers, processions, and acts of penance became common responses. Churches became centers of both spiritual comfort and fear, as gatherings could also accelerate transmission. Clergy members often died while caring for the sick, further deepening the crisis. The plague also influenced theological debates and religious authority. Some interpreted it as a test of faith, while others questioned why divine protection seemed absent. The sense of vulnerability shaped the religious atmosphere of the early medieval period. Long-term consequences. The long-term effects of the Plague of Justinian are still debated among historians. However, it clearly contributed to the weakening of the Byzantine Empire's economic and military power. This weakening may have indirectly facilitated the rapid expansion of Islamic caliphates in the 7th century, as both the Byzantine and Sasanian Persian empires were exhausted by plague and war. The population decline across Europe may also have slowed urban development for centuries. Some scholars argue that the pandemic marked the beginning of the transition from the classical ancient world to the early Middle Ages. Although the empire survived, it never fully recovered its former strength. Constantinople remained a powerful city for centuries, but the dream of fully restoring Roman dominance faded. Scientific rediscovery. For centuries, the Plague of Justinian was known only through historical texts. In modern times, advances in archaeology and genetic research have confirmed that Yersinia pestis was indeed responsible. DNA extracted from ancient burial sites has linked the Justinianic plague strain to later medieval plague strains, including those that caused the Black Death. This discovery reveals that plague pandemics have occurred in multiple historical waves. The Justinian outbreak represents the first known major pandemic caused by this bacterium. Legacy. The Plague of Justinian stands as one of the earliest recorded pandemics to dramatically alter the course of history. It demonstrated how interconnected trade networks could spread disease across continents long before modern globalization. Though often overshadowed by later outbreaks, its impact on the Byzantine Empire and the wider Mediterranean world was profound. It reshaped politics, weakened economies, altered religious thought, and contributed to the transformation of the ancient world. In many ways, the Plague of Justinian reminds us that pandemics are not modern phenomena. They have shaped empires, redirected history, and revealed the fragile balance between human civilization